The airport staff thought they were humiliating an ordinary woman that morning, but before the day was over, they would discover they had made the biggest mistake of their careers. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below. And if you believe people should be judged by their character, not their appearance, make sure to like and subscribe. Now, back to Emily Carter. The massive terminal of Kennedy International Airport buzzed with the familiar sounds of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and hurried conversations. Travelers moved beneath towering glass walls as sunlight spilled across the polished floors. Among the thousands of passengers passing through that morning, Emily Carter barely attracted a second glance. At 35 years old, she looked like someone anyone might pass on the street without noticing. Her blonde hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She wore a cream-colored sweater, faded blue jeans, and comfortable walking shoes. No designer labels. No expensive jewelry except for a modest-looking wedding ring resting quietly on her finger. She carried a worn leather tote bag over one shoulder and walked with calm confidence toward the premium customer service area. There was nothing flashy about her appearance. Nothing that suggested power, influence, or wealth. And that was exactly how Emily preferred it. For years, she had chosen simplicity over attention. While many people spent fortunes trying to look important, Emily had long ago discovered that true confidence didn't need an audience. As she approached the service counter, she glanced at her phone. A brief text message appeared on the screen, running a few minutes behind. Conference call. Meet you at the gate. Love you. Jonathan. A small smile crossed her face. Her husband was finishing an international business call somewhere else inside the airport. They had arrived together, but separated after security. Neither of them thought much about it. After all, it was supposed to be an ordinary travel day. Emily slipped her phone back into her bag and stepped toward the premium assistant's desk. Above the counter hung elegant signs, advertising luxury travel services, priority boarding, and exclusive lounge access. Behind the counter stood Lisa Reynolds, a supervisor known throughout the terminal for her strict approach and sharp judgments. Lisa immediately noticed Emily approaching. Her eyes traveled from the simple sweater to the jeans and practical shoes. A subtle expression appeared on her face. It lasted only a second, but it revealed everything. The assessment had already been made. The judgment had already been delivered. Emily, however, didn't notice. She simply offered a polite smile as she reached the counter. Around them, passengers hurried toward their gates, completely unaware that a moment was unfolding that would soon bring an entire section of the airport to a standstill. Because while Lisa Reynolds saw an ordinary woman standing in front of her, there were details she failed to notice. Details hidden in plain sight. And before the day ended, those details would change everything. Emily stopped in front of the premium assistance counter and offered a warm smile. "Good morning," she said. "I need a little help with my reservation." Lisa Reynolds looked up from her computer screen. For a brief moment, her eyes settled on Emily's face. Then they moved downward, taking in the simple sweater, the faded jeans, and the inexpensive travel bag resting against her side. Something changed in her expression. It was subtle, almost invisible, but it was there. Emily had seen that look before. Most people had. It was the look people gave when they thought they already knew your story. "Reservation number?" Lisa asked without returning the smile. Emily calmly provided the information. Her voice remained pleasant. The terminal continued humming around them as travelers rolled suitcases across the polished floor. Nearby screens displayed departure times while boarding announcements echoed overhead. Lisa typed for several seconds. Then she frowned. "You are requesting access to the executive lounge?" she asked. "Yes," Emily replied. "There seems to be an issue with my booking. I was told it could be resolved here." Lisa glanced at the screen again before leaning back slightly in her chair. "The executive lounge is reserved for premium passengers." Emily blinked. "I understand. And certain membership holders. I understand that as well." Lisa folded her arms. "Those memberships are not easy to obtain." The words were technically polite. The tone was not. Emily remained calm. "That is why I came to the service desk. I was hoping you could help me understand what happened." A businessman standing nearby briefly looked over. Lisa's voice became slightly louder. "The system is usually accurate." Emily felt the first small sting of embarrassment. Not because of what Lisa was saying, but because of how she was saying it. She had not asked for special treatment. She had only asked for assistance. Yet somehow the conversation already felt different. Across the counter, Lisa continued studying her. The supervisor had spent years working at one of the busiest airports in the country. She believed she could identify passengers instantly. Wealth, status, importance, experience had convinced her that appearances rarely lied. Unfortunately, that confidence often blinded her. "Do you have proof of membership?" Lisa asked. Emily reached into her tote bag. Before she could retrieve the documents, another employee walked past and quietly whispered something to Lisa. Both women briefly glanced toward Emily. The employee smirked before walking away. Emily pretended not to notice. The room suddenly felt colder. Around them, several travelers had begun paying attention, not because anyone was causing a scene, but because tension had quietly entered the conversation. Emily handed over her paperwork. Lisa barely glanced at it before setting it aside. "Interesting," she said. "Very interesting." The words carried an edge that made Emily uncomfortable. For the first time that morning, she sensed that this was no longer about fixing a reservation. Somewhere in the terminal, Jonathan Carter was finishing his call, completely unaware that events were already moving in a direction neither of them expected. And standing at the counter, Emily had no idea that one small detail hidden among her documents was about to catch the attention of someone who would change everything. Lisa picked up the folder Emily had handed over and flipped through the documents with obvious skepticism. At first, she seemed almost disappointed that everything appeared organized. Then her eyes stopped on a particular page. A faint crease formed between her eyebrows. Emily noticed the reaction immediately. "Is there a problem?" she asked calmly. Lisa did not answer right away. Instead, she looked at the page again, then at Emily, then back at the page. Standing a few feet away, a young airport employee named Tyler happened to glance toward the open folder. He was only 24 and had been working at the airport for less than a year, but something caught his attention. A name, not Emily's name. Another name printed near the authorization documents. Tyler could not see the entire page, but he recognized it instantly. His eyes widened for a brief second before he quickly looked away. Lisa, however, remained focused on Emily. "These documents are unusual," she said. "Not really," Emily replied. "They are standard travel authorizations." Lisa tapped the folder with one finger. For most people, perhaps. The atmosphere around the counter grew increasingly uncomfortable. A family standing nearby stopped pretending not to listen. A businessman checking messages on his phone lowered it slightly. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed tension building beneath the surface. Emily kept her voice steady. "If there is a specific issue, I would be happy to clarify it." Lisa gave a thin smile. "I am simply trying to understand why someone requesting executive services would be carrying documentation connected to organizations most people never interact with." Emily blinked. "Those documents are personal." "Of course they are." The response sounded polite. The meaning behind it did not. Tyler glanced over again. This time he noticed something else. As Emily adjusted the folder, a small identification card partially slid into view. Only a corner was visible, but it displayed the logo of one of the largest charitable foundations in the country. Tyler felt a strange knot form in his stomach. He had seen that logo before. Everyone in his department had. The foundation had recently partnered with several major transportation hubs on community projects. Before he could think further, Lisa closed the folder. "I believe additional verification may be necessary." Emily frowned slightly. "Additional verification for what?" "That depends." Lisa leaned forward. "Tell me, Mrs. Carter, exactly who are you traveling with today?" The question felt oddly personal. Emily hesitated for a moment. "My husband." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "And where is he now?" Emily was beginning to understand that this conversation had moved far beyond a reservation issue. Somewhere else in the terminal, Jonathan Carter ended his conference call and checked the time. Meanwhile, back at the counter, Tyler watched in growing silence. Because the more he looked at the documents Lisa seemed determined to question, the more certain he became that everyone standing there was missing something important. And if he was right, the situation was about to become far more complicated than anyone imagined. Emily could feel the conversation drifting further away from anything related to travel. The questions were no longer about reservations, lounge access, or boarding passes. They were about her. Lisa's eyes remained fixed on her, as if she were trying to solve a puzzle that had already frustrated her. "I am simply following procedure," Lisa said. I hope you understand. Emily nodded politely. Then perhaps you can explain which procedure requires information about my husband. For the first time, a few nearby passengers openly exchanged glances. The question was fair. Lisa seemed to realize it, but instead of stepping back, she doubled down. When unusual circumstances appear in a reservation profile, we are expected to verify details. Emily kept her composure. And what exactly is unusual? Lisa tapped her keyboard several times. Your travel history. Another pause. Your documentation. Another pause. Certain account notes. Emily folded her hands calmly in front of her. None of those sound unusual. The words were delivered softly, but they landed with surprising force. For a brief moment, Lisa looked irritated. She had expected nervousness. She had expected confusion. Instead, Emily remained remarkably calm. That confidence only made Lisa more suspicious. Across the counter, Tyler continued working nearby, but his attention never fully left the conversation. The logo he had seen inside the folder kept bothering him. Then something else happened. As Emily reached for her phone to check the time, the screen briefly illuminated. Tyler caught sight of an incoming message banner before it disappeared. He froze. The sender name looked familiar. Extremely familiar. His eyes widened. Surely it could not be the same person. Meanwhile, Lisa's voice became slightly louder. Mrs. Carter, perhaps there has been a misunderstanding regarding the services available to passengers in this area. Several people turned toward the counter. Emily felt dozens of eyes settling on her. I do not believe there has been a misunderstanding, she replied. I received confirmation before arriving. Lisa offered a smile that never reached her eyes. Confirmation can sometimes be issued in error. The implication was obvious. The room seemed to grow quieter. A businessman standing nearby slowly lowered his newspaper. A woman waiting for assistance stopped scrolling through her phone. Everyone sensed the same thing. This conversation was becoming less professional with every passing minute. Tyler's stomach tightened. He glanced toward a senior operations manager working 30 feet away. Then he looked back at Emily. The more pieces he noticed, the more concerned he became. The name, the foundation documents, the message notification. None of it matched the image Lisa seemed determined to believe. Yet Lisa remained completely confident in her judgment. Sometimes arrogance is loud. Other times it appears as certainty. The certainty that you already know who someone is before they ever speak. And at that moment, Lisa Reynolds was absolutely certain. What she did not know was that every assumption she was making was bringing her closer to a mistake that would soon echo far beyond a simple customer service desk. Because only a few hundred yards away, Jonathan Carter had just started walking toward the terminal concourse, unaware that his arrival would change the entire direction of the day. The tension around the service counter had become impossible to ignore. What had started as a simple request now felt like a public examination. Emily stood quietly, refusing to raise her voice, refusing to match the energy directed at her. Yet somehow that calmness seemed to frustrate Lisa even more. Mrs. Carter, Lisa said, straightening her posture. I believe it would be best if we move this matter away from the premium service area. Emily looked at her carefully. Why? The question hung in the air. For a moment, Lisa appeared surprised that she had been asked to explain herself. Because there are unresolved concerns regarding your account status. Emily felt a wave of disbelief. You still have not identified a single concern. Several nearby travelers exchanged looks. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Lisa quickly turned toward another employee. Please contact airport security and request assistance. The words landed like a stone in still water. Heads turned immediately. A young mother standing nearby frowned. A businessman slowly lowered his coffee cup. Even Tyler looked shocked. Emily blinked. Security? She asked calmly. For what reason? Lisa folded her arms. Standard procedure. But everyone listening knew it was not standard procedure. Emily had remained polite from the beginning. She had not argued. She had not disrupted anyone. She had simply asked for help. The room seemed to grow quieter. The embarrassment Emily had been holding back finally began to settle into her chest. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because dozens of strangers were now watching her as though she had. It was a feeling many people know well. The feeling of being judged before being understood. Tyler could not stay silent any longer. He stepped closer to Lisa and lowered his voice. Supervisor Reynolds, maybe we should review the documentation again. Lisa shot him a sharp look. I have already reviewed it. I understand, but there are details that may be important. Thank you, Tyler. I can handle this. Tyler immediately stepped back, but concern remained written across his face. Emily noticed it. For the first time that morning, she realized someone else in the terminal seemed uneasy about what was happening. Then her phone vibrated softly. She glanced down. Another message from Jonathan. Finished. Heading your way now. Emily stared at the screen for a second before slipping the phone back into her bag. She did not reply. She did not want to bother him. Surely this misunderstanding would be resolved within minutes. At least, that was what she still believed. Across the terminal, sunlight streamed through enormous glass windows overlooking the runways. Passengers continued moving toward departure gates while boarding announcements echoed overhead. Life carried on normally for everyone else. Yet at that service counter, something was quietly approaching a breaking point. Because the security request had already been sent, senior staff were beginning to hear about the situation. Tyler's growing concern was spreading to others. And somewhere beyond the crowded concourse, Jonathan Carter had just started walking toward the premium service area, completely unaware that every step was bringing him closer to a scene that would leave an entire section of the airport speechless. Jonathan Carter moved through the terminal with the relaxed confidence of a man who never needed to announce his importance. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he carried no entourage and attracted little attention from the travelers rushing past him. To most people, he was simply another business passenger heading toward his gate. But appearances have a way of hiding the truth. As Jonathan walked, his phone vibrated. An automated travel update flashed across the screen. Normally, he would have ignored it. This time something caught his eye. The notification referenced a service escalation attached to Emily's reservation profile. Jonathan slowed slightly. A service escalation was unusual. Emily rarely had problems when traveling. He opened the details. The information was limited, but one phrase stood out immediately. Security assistance requested. Jonathan stopped walking. His expression did not change, but something cold settled behind his eyes. Several hundred feet away, Emily remained standing at the service counter while the uncomfortable silence continued to grow. Travelers pretended not to watch, but nearly everyone nearby was paying attention now. Lisa still believed she was in complete control of the situation. Tyler no longer felt so certain. In fact, he was becoming increasingly worried. Unable to ignore his instincts, he quietly stepped away from the counter and approached a nearby operations manager named Karen Mitchell. Karen listened as Tyler quickly explained what he had seen. At first she looked skeptical. Then Tyler mentioned the name he thought he had recognized in the documents. Karen's face changed immediately. "Are you sure?" she asked quietly. Tyler nodded. Karen glanced toward Emily from across the terminal. Then she looked back at Tyler. "Stay here," she said. "Do not say anything yet." Meanwhile, Jonathan resumed walking, but his pace had changed. He was no longer casually making his way through the concourse. Every step carried purpose now. Along the way, he passed airline employees who immediately recognized him. One supervisor straightened so quickly she nearly dropped her tablet. A gate manager whispered something to a colleague. Another employee discreetly picked up a phone. The reaction spread faster than anyone expected. Jonathan barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the information he had just read. Back at the counter, Karen had reached a private office and accessed an internal database. 30 seconds later, she was staring at her monitor in disbelief. She checked the information twice. Then a third time. The color slowly drained from her face. Without wasting another second, she grabbed her company radio. "I need the regional director at Terminal 4 immediately," she said. "Right now." The person on the other end sounded confused. Karen almost never sounded alarmed. This time she did. The atmosphere inside the airport was changing, though most passengers did not realize it yet. Invisible currents were moving beneath the surface. Managers were receiving calls. Executives were being notified. Questions were spreading from office to office. And standing at the center of it all, Emily still had no idea what was happening. She only knew that people were suddenly looking at her differently. Then, from the far end of the terminal, a familiar figure appeared. Jonathan had finally entered the premium service area. And the moment the first senior manager saw him, everything changed. The effect was immediate. One moment, the premium service area was filled with quiet conversations and rolling luggage. The next, a strange silence began spreading through the terminal. Jonathan walked forward with measured steps, his eyes focused entirely on Emily. He had not raised his voice. He had not demanded attention, yet attention followed him anyway. Karen Mitchell was the first senior manager to reach the scene. Her expression was tight with concern. Behind her came another manager, then another. Within seconds, employees who normally worked in private offices were appearing in the terminal. Passengers noticed it immediately. Something unusual was happening. Lisa noticed it too. At first she seemed confused. Then she watched as Karen moved past everyone else and approached Jonathan directly. "Mr. Carter," Karen said carefully. "Thank you for coming." The color drained from Lisa's face. She stared at Karen as if she had misheard her. Jonathan gave a brief nod, but did not look away from Emily. "What happened?" he asked quietly. It was not an angry question. Somehow that made it worse. Karen hesitated. Across the counter, Lisa suddenly felt the confidence she had carried all morning beginning to crack. Tyler watched silently. He already knew what was coming. He had seen enough clues to understand that the situation was far larger than anyone realized. Around them, employees exchanged nervous glances. Several had begun checking their phones. Others were whispering. Names were spreading through internal messages. Jonathan Carter, the founder of one of the largest technology investment groups in the country. A man whose companies employed tens of thousands of people. A man who quietly sat on advisory boards connected to transportation infrastructure across the nation. A man whose opinion carried enormous weight. Lisa looked from Jonathan to Emily, then back again. The realization was beginning to form. But that was only the first shock. Karen turned toward Emily. Her voice softened immediately. "Mrs. Carter, I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding." Emily blinked. "Misunderstanding?" Karen looked uncomfortable. "Very uncomfortable. There are details regarding your profile that should have been recognized much earlier." The room grew still. Lisa felt her stomach drop. She suddenly remembered the documents. The foundation logo. The unusual account notes. The travel authorizations. One by one, the pieces began fitting together. Then Karen said something that changed everything. "The Carter Foundation has contributed more than $20 million to accessibility and educational initiatives connected to airports nationwide." A hush fell over the terminal. Several employees froze. A businessman standing nearby lowered his briefcase. Even some passengers seemed stunned. Jonathan was important. That alone would have been enough to shock everyone. But Emily was not simply the wife of an influential man. She was the founder of one of the most respected charitable organizations in the country. The room went silent. Lisa could barely breathe. The woman she had judged by a sweater and a travel bag had spent years helping communities across America. The woman she had questioned in front of strangers had done more good for others than most people could accomplish in a lifetime. And as the full weight of that realization settled over the crowd, I turned toward Emily Carter. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The premium service area that had been filled with movement and conversation now felt frozen in place. Emily stood quietly beside Jonathan while dozens of eyes remained fixed on her. The attention made her uncomfortable. It always had. She had spent years building programs, scholarships, and community projects across the country, yet she had never enjoyed being the center of attention. Jonathan glanced at her with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Emily nodded. "I am fine." Then she looked toward Lisa. The supervisor appeared completely different from the confident woman who had been standing behind the counter only minutes earlier. Her shoulders had stiffened. Her face had gone pale. She opened her mouth several times, searching for words that would not come. Around them, managers stood silently. No one wanted to interrupt what was happening. Karen finally stepped forward. "Mrs. Carter, on behalf of the airport administration, I sincerely apologize for everything that has happened today." Emily listened politely. Karen continued. "The treatment you received does not reflect our values." Emily looked around the terminal. She saw nervous employees, curious passengers, embarrassed managers. Most of all, she saw people waiting to see how she would respond. Many expected anger. Some expected demands. Others expected consequences. Instead, Emily asked a simple question. "May I ask something?" Karen immediately nodded. "Of course." Emily turned her attention toward Lisa. Her voice remained calm. "When I first walked up to the counter this morning, what was it that made you decide I did not belong here?" The question landed harder than any accusation could have. Lisa lowered her eyes. For the first time all day, she had no answer. Because the truth was painfully obvious. It had been the sweater, the jeans, the simple travel bag, the absence of visible status. The assumptions had come first. Everything else had followed. The silence stretched across the terminal. Nobody rushed to fill it. Nobody could. Jonathan remained quiet. He understood exactly what Emily was doing. She was not interested in punishment. She wanted understanding. Eventually Lisa spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I made assumptions. Emily nodded slowly. Yes. Another silence followed. Then Emily offered a small, sad smile. The problem is not that you made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. Lisa looked up. Emily continued. The problem is how quickly you decided who I was before you knew anything about me. Those words seemed to echo through the terminal. Several employees lowered their heads. Others stared at the floor. Tyler felt a strange sense of relief. Someone needed to say it. Karen looked genuinely moved. Jonathan reached for Emily's hand and gently squeezed it. Across the terminal, the atmosphere had completely changed. What had begun as an embarrassing public misunderstanding had become something far more powerful. A lesson that everyone present would remember. And as Lisa struggled to hold back tears of humiliation and regret, she finally realized that the most important person in the terminal had never been Jonathan Carter. It had been Emily all along. No one moved for several moments after Emily finished speaking. The lesson was simple, yet it carried more weight than any speech the managers could have given. Around the terminal, people slowly returned to their own thoughts, but the atmosphere had changed. The hurried energy that normally filled the airport seemed quieter now, more reflective. Karen took a careful breath before speaking again. Mrs. Carter, we would like the opportunity to make this right. Emily looked at her kindly. You already can. Karen seemed surprised. How? Emily glanced around the terminal one last time. Train people to see individuals before appearances. That would be enough. The answer caught everyone off guard. There was no demand for compensation. No request for special treatment. No attempt to embarrass anyone further. Jonathan smiled softly. It was exactly the response he expected. Throughout their years together, Emily had never been interested in proving she was important. She cared about improving things, not winning arguments. Karen nodded slowly. We will. For the first time that day, genuine relief appeared on several faces. Even Lisa seemed stunned by the grace she was being shown. She stepped forward hesitantly. Mrs. Carter. Her voice trembled. Emily turned toward her. I am truly sorry. The words were simple, honest, and for the first time, they sounded sincere. Emily held her gaze for a moment before nodding. Thank you. Nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes accountability begins with a single honest admission. The tension that had gripped the terminal finally began to fade. Managers dispersed. Employees returned to their stations. Passengers resumed their journeys. Yet many of them carried the memory of what they had witnessed. A businessman who had observed the entire exchange quietly reflected on how often he judged people during his own travels. A young mother hoped her children would grow up remembering lessons like this one. Tyler felt proud that he had trusted his instincts when something seemed wrong. Even Karen knew the story would be discussed throughout the airport for years. Eventually, a boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Emily looked at Jonathan and laughed softly. We are going to miss our flight if we stay here much longer. Jonathan smiled. Then we should probably leave. As they began walking toward their gate, travelers stepped aside, but not because of wealth or influence. They stepped aside because of respect. The respect that comes from character. The respect that cannot be purchased. The respect earned through humility. Behind them, Lisa watched quietly. The lesson would stay with her for the rest of her career. Long after the names and titles were forgotten, she would remember the woman in the simple sweater who had every reason to seek revenge and chose dignity instead. And as Emily and Jonathan disappeared into the flow of passengers, sunlight poured through the glass walls of the terminal, casting long reflections across the floor. The airport returned to normal. Flights departed. New travelers arrived. Life moved forward. But for everyone who witnessed that day, one truth remained impossible to forget. The easiest person to underestimate is often the one who has nothing to prove. And that day, an entire terminal remembered what dignity looks like.